Welcome everyone to the first part in a two-part series on the heart. In this video, I will take you through blood flow through the heart. We'll look at a single red blood cell and we'll look at the pathway it needs to go, which chambers and which valves and which blood vessels it'll go through, as well as we'll take a look at everything as far as the cardiac cycle. We'll look at contractions and relaxations and the valves when they open and close. And then in the second part, I will take you through the EKG, as well as the phonocardiogram and the graphs of the ventricular volume and ventricular pressure. And by the end of these two videos, after watching these two videos over and over and studying, I will expect you to be able to answer questions like, can you not only describe what ventricular systole is, for example, but can you show me where it is on a graph? Can you describe what ventricular diastole is, or atrial systole or atrial diastole? Why do the semilunar valves close? Why do they open? What causes them to open? What causes the atrioventricular valves to open or to shut? And in relation to the phonocardiogram or the graphs of the ventricular volume or ventricular pressure. And also answer questions like, looking at an EKG, could you tell me, is this a normal sinus rhythm? Or is there some kind of tachycardia, like atrial fibrillation? Or is it some kind of bradycardia? These kind of questions I will expect you to be able to answer after studying well these two videos. And so let's get started and let's get to it.
So before we really get started, let's just look at this from a bird's eye view. So here's the heart. And we're looking at this thing as if our patient is facing us. If you took this heart directly out of you, you would actually be facing this way. In other words, when we look at it like this is actually the anterior surface. This surface would be closest to your chest, where here would be the posterior surface. So, in other words, when we look at it like this is actually the right side of the heart, and this is the left side of the heart. You see that? You see these two little pouches up here? These are called auricles. So this here is the right auricle, and this little pouch here is the left auricle. See that? We have 4 chambers in here, in the heart, in the human heart. The top 2, the superior 2, are the atria, and the bottom 2 are called ventricles. And we have a few major blood vessels attached to the heart. We have the aorta, the pulmonary trunk, and trunk is just a fancy word for short vessel. And we also have the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava right here. These are a few of the major vessels attached to the heart. Okay, so here is the superior vena cava that we just mentioned and the inferior vena cava. And these two vessels are really bring in the deoxygenated blood first into the heart. I always start with these two vessels because this is really where it's the best place to start. Now, really, in a cyclic system like the cardiovascular system, there really is no start and stop. But because we got to start somewhere, and so the blood comes in first I should say, deoxygenated blood first comes into the heart through the superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. Actually, as well as the coronary sinus, but you can't see it from this view. So here are the two vessels we can see. And they enter and they bring in blood. Both these bring in blood, and the blood enters the right atrium. That's this first chamber, the first of the four chambers of the heart. And then the blood will then move through this valve and into the right ventricle. Notice all this is right. That's because this is a heart that's facing us as if your patient is facing you. So this is actually the right side. And this valve here, the reason why it's called the atrioventricular valve is because this valve separates the atrium from the ventricle. So this is the right atrioventricular valve. You can also call it the tricuspid because it has three cusps. 1, 2, 3. Tricuspid, or the right atrioventricular valve. If you say tricuspid valve, then you don't have to say left or right. Actually, it would even be wrong because there is no right. Right assumes that there is a left. You wouldn't say right unless there's a left. You wouldn't say left unless there's a right with anything actually in the human body. Okay, so blood first starts in the superior vena cava and inferior, enters the right atrium through the right atrioventricular valve and into the right ventricle. Then what happens is blood then takes a turn and it goes up through this valve here is the pulmonary valve, because this small vessel here is the pulmonary trunk. You can also call this the right semilunar valve. So this also has two names. The right semilunar valve, right because here's the left one here, right semilunar valve, or you can call it the pulmonary trunk because this is the valve that leads to pulmonary valve because it leads to the pulmonary trunk. Then what happens is blood is able to go, this is all deoxygenated by the way, no oxygen yet. It hasn't been oxygenated. Remember the heart is just a pump. The human heart is just a pump. It doesn't really supply the body with oxygen. It's just a pump. That's what the lungs do. So now the blood is able to go right, or it could go left. Either way, it's going to go to one of the two lungs. So here is the right pulmonary artery. You say, well, why is it an artery if it's blue? Well, all our arteries are red. Well, no, not as a rule. The rule is artery away. Artery away. That's how you remember it. If it's going away from the heart, it's called an artery. So, and it picks up oxygen and drops off deoxygenated blood, drops off the carbon dioxide, and then leaves the lungs and enters the right pulmonary veins, which are these two here. And these are also, contrary to what you might think, the veins are actually red. As long as you have the word pulmonary in front of the word, in front of the vessel, it's going to be the opposite of what you might think. The pulmonary vein is actually red, and the pulmonary artery is actually blue. Because this is the only part these are the only arteries, the only vessels in the whole body. I mean, the pulmonary arteries are the only ones in the whole body that haven't yet gotten oxygen, and the pulmonary veins are the only ones that just received oxygen. You see? Whereas all the rest of the body, those arteries are oxygenated and the veins are deoxygenated. For example, right here and here, these are your two superior and inferior vena cavas, and they are deoxygenated. So where does the blood then enter the blood coming from the pulmonary veins, where do they enter? Well, it's not here, and it's not here. It's actually way over here. Here's the other pulmonary vein. This is the left pulmonary vein. Both this one and this one enter the enter the left atrium. The left atrium. And just as what we saw happens here, blood kind of drops down and into this ventricle. Blood also on this side drops down and into this ventricle. So it goes through the left atrioventricular valve, that's this white guy right here, and into the left ventricle. And actually, as long as we're at it, what happens on the right side of the heart happens on the left side of the heart at the exact same time, or almost the exact same time. In other words, when blood fills up here in the right atrium, blood also fills up here in the left atrium. And when this blood flows into the right ventricle, blood is also flowing into the left ventricle at the same time. Then what happens? Then blood turns up just like it turned up here into the pulmonary trunk. Actually here it goes up and through this valve. This is the second semilunar valve. This is now the left semilunar valve, or you can call it the aortic valve. Why? Because it leads, the blood then leads to the aorta. So this is the aorta here. A couple other things you want to take note of. You have some strings. These are the chordae tendineae, the tendinous cords that hold on to your two atrioventricular valves. And on the other side, they're being held onto by the papillary muscles. So you have a papillary muscle here, and here, and here, and here, and here. These papillary muscles hold on to the chordae tendineae, and the chordae tendineae hold on to the atrioventricular valves. They don't really pull on them, so to speak. They don't pull to open anything. Really what they do is they prevent the valve from blowing backwards when there's increased pressure in these two ventricles. When these two ventricles start to squeeze and are under pressure, these papillary muscles and chordae tendineae will hold on to the valve and prevent the valve from just blowing backwards and allowing blood to go the wrong way. That's really what all valves in the body do, is prevent backflow, prevent blood from moving backwards. We mentioned there were two names for this valve. This is the right atrioventricular valve. You can also call it the tricuspid. Well, this one is the left atrioventricular valve, but you can also call it the bicuspid valve. And there's actually even another name, which is called the mitral valve, named for looks like a bishop's hat. So there are four valves, 1, 2, 3, 4, yet we have just covered 9 names. Right atrioventricular valve, or the tricuspid, the left atrioventricular valve, or the bicuspid, or the mitral valve. This is the right semilunar valve, or you can call it even easier is just to say the pulmonary valve. And this one right here is the left semilunar valve, and even easier than saying that is just saying, well, where does it lead to? It leads to the aorta. So you can call this the aortic valve. There's a couple of regions. This whole superior region here is called the base. And this point, this region here, this is called the apex of the heart. This is the apex. So let's just do this one more time. we have the superior and inferior vena cavas. They enter the right atrium through the right atrioventricular valve, or the tricuspid, and into the right ventricle. Then it took a turn and it went up through the pulmonary valve and into the pulmonary trunk. All these are all blue, 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 blue. Why? Because they haven't yet been oxygenated. They haven't picked up oxygen yet. Then the pulmonary trunk splits into left and right pulmonary arteries, even though it's blue because it's going away from the heart. It goes to the lungs, picks up oxygen, and when the vessels leave, they're still called pulmonary because pulmonary means lungs, but now they're veins. Why are they veins if they're red? Well, because they are going towards the heart. The only four vessels where they're going to be opposite of what you might think. These two arteries are actually blue, and these two veins are actually red. Then once the blood enters into the heart, it actually enters into the left atrium through the left atrioventricular valve and into the left ventricle. Takes a turn up through the semilunar valve, the left semilunar valve, or the aortic valve, and up into the aorta. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, the lungs, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 14 steps to finally leave the heart to go supply the body with oxygen and to pick up carbon dioxide from the body. So there you have it. So even on this right here, I still haven't put in everything there is. And there's even more that you're going to have to know, at least for lab. This is the interventricular septum, because this is the wall that separates the two ventricles, and there's even depending on the cut here, if this wasn't cut like this, you'd find the interatrial septum right here as well. Okay, so that's the blood flow through the heart. I realize that is a lot, but I will expect you to be able to, just take a sheet of paper, blank sheet of paper, and just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or take a blank sheet of paper, draw out the heart, and figure it out that way. Either of those ways, I will expect you to know the blood flow through the heart. Okay, just a little bit on the heart now, on the overview, the function now. The heart is actually 4 pumps that work in pairs, just as we were talking before. Whatever happens on the left side happens on the right side at the exact same time. The 2 atria contract at the same time, and the 2 ventricles contract at the same time. 1 cardiac cycle is 1 heartbeat and 1 resting phase. And 1 heartbeat is that pum pum, pum pum, pum pum, which is your lupped up, lupped up, lupped up. What are those 2 words? Those are the 2 words of those are what we use for the 2 heart sounds. Lub is S1, dup is S2. The 2 heart sounds that we hear. Lupped up, rest, lupped up, rest. So one of those, lupped up, rest, is 1 cardiac cycle. A heartbeat, so what's 1 heartbeat? It's just these 2 sounds right here, plus your resting phase, lupped up, rest, lupped up, rest. That's how it works. When the ventricles are relaxed, the walls look like this, and when they're contracted, they look like this. They squeeze, they thicken, and that's how they eject blood out of the ventricles. The fibers, the muscle fibers, are in a figure 8. Figure 8. They do this. Then that twisting motion helps assist the blood out of the heart. All right, so we have a few steps to look at. all blood flow through the circulatory system should only move one way with the help of our one-way valves. All valves in the body, all valves in our veins, in our lymphatic system. When a chamber increases in pressure, blood will try to get out any way it can. Blood doesn't have a brain or anything like that. It'll try to go any way it can. In the ventricles, it'll attempt to escape through one of two openings. One, back through the AV valves where it came from, or two, forward through the semilunar valves to the circuits. Do you see what we're saying? What we're saying is that you see blood, when it enters and it does this, and then it comes in through the ventricles here. When the ventricle contracts and squeezes, there's two ways it can exit. It could go the right way, forward through the semilunar valve here, but it could also go the wrong way, this direction, which is backwards, back into the atrium. And the same thing over here. That's a bad thing. So what happens when the ventricles contract is that the first thing that happens, as soon as the ventricle contracts, this valve actually shuts. And when it shuts, it actually makes the first heart sound called lub. That's actually the first heart sound. So first, the increase in ventricular pressure forces the AV valves to shut. Then it forces the semilunar valves to open. So actually the semilunar valves were closed momentarily. All the valves have to be closed for a moment. Otherwise the ventricles couldn't increase in pressure. You can't increase in pressure unless the system is closed. So what happens first? The ventricles first begin to contract, go into systole, ventricular systole. Then the atrioventricular valves shut. Then the ventricles continue to squeeze. Then finally those two semilunar valves open, allowing the blood finally to exit out of the ventricles. Okay? And then when all that is happening, the papillary muscles hold on to the chordae tendineae. The chordae tendineae hold on to those two atrioventricular valves, making sure that those valves don't bend the wrong way and let blood back the wrong way. Does that make sense, you guys? Notice also one more thing I just wanted to point out. These valves have these tendinous cords, these chordae tendineae, because these valves are so large. The semilunar valves don't need them. The pulmonary valve and the aortic valve, they don't need those cords because they're not as big as these two here. All right, now let's get into the cardiac cycle. Once we do this, we're pretty much we're sitting pretty good. We're definitely halfway through here. All right. First, what happens is, and so I mean, we can look at this. We can do it this way, or we can just look at a diagram. Actually, let's just look at a diagram. Here's the cardiac cycle. Maybe just go like this. All right. Step one is when blood first enters the heart. Well, if it's deoxygenated, it enters right here. But also the oxygenated blood enters over here. This is the right atrium, and this is the left atrium. So when the two atria fill, that's step one. The two atria fill with blood. Then the force of gravity pulls open the two atrioventricular valves, and 75% of that blood enters the ventricles. That's step two. Step one, the atria fill up with blood. 75% of that blood enters into the ventricles. By what mechanism? By gravity. The answer, by gravity. They just open. Nothing has contracted. These guys are relaxed. These guys are relaxed. In other words, the atria are in atrial diastole, to dilate. You know, when your eyes are dilated, when your vessels are dilated, they're relaxed. They're not contracting, they're not squeezing. So the atria, the blood flows out of the atria without the atria even doing anything. And the ventricles, in order to receive blood into the ventricles are also relaxed. The ventricles are in ventricular diastole as well. If you're going to receive somebody, if you're going to give somebody a hug, you open up your arms, right? Just like the ventricles are open in order to receive blood, just like the atria were also open in atrial diastole to receive blood. But also, when the blood leaves, the first amount of blood leaves, the 75%, the atria are still in atrial diastole because it's gravity that works on that first 75%. Then what happens? Do the ventricles contract yet? No, not yet. We need 100%. Then the 25% is ejected out of the atria due to, now we call it atrial systole, atrial contraction, atrial systole. The atria change and go from relaxation to contraction, pushing the last 25% into the ventricles. Everybody with me? Now, at this point, the ventricles are still in ventricular diastole, and they have now 100% of the blood that's going to be in there. Whereas up in the atria, we have 0% blood, because that last 25% was ejected here due to atrial, what is it? Atrial systole. Now we are ready for the ventricles to contract. We are ready for the ventricles to go into ventricular systole. We are ready for the ventricles to squeeze and decrease the amount of volume, the amount of space. That way, the blood will be ejected out of the heart. Ventricles begin ventricular systole. First thing that happens, ventricular systole. Then the two atrioventricular valves shut, making S1, lub. Okay, S1. The sound is due to the atrioventricular valves shutting. What causes them to shut? It's because there is more pressure in the ventricles than in the atria. Blood goes from high to low. So because blood was about to go the wrong way, the valves shut, preventing blood from going back the way it came from. Now what happens? Well, these guys now are closed. The semilunar valves were closed already. Otherwise, there's no way to increase in pressure. So the ventricles continue to increase in pressure, finally forcing the two semilunar valves to open and allowing blood to go up through here, through the pulmonary trunk, or this oxygenated blood to go through the aortic valve and up through the aorta. One last thing, step 4. Now, where is most of the blood? See, actually, not all the blood actually is ever ejected, but most of the blood is up here and up here. Step 4. Step 4, we are squeezed. The ventricles are squeezed, and all the blood, let's just say most of the blood is up here. Now what has to happen? Well, the heart has to go back to step 1. The heart has to go back to its initial state. In other words, the ventricles have to go from ventricular systole to ventricular diastole, relaxed once again. This creates a vacuum. This creates low pressure here and high pressure here, causing the blood to want to move back to where it came from, and this wrong direction causes these two valves to shut, making S2. We had lub, now we have dup. Lub is due to these two shutting, dup is due to these two shutting. That's your the total of four valves. And now we are back to step one. Now we go back to step one. We are back to the first state that we were in. Notice how thick the walls are of the heart. This wall is so much thinner than this wall here. The reason why is because this wall, this ventricle here, the right ventricle only has to pump blood to the lungs, which are pretty much on the same level. It doesn't really have to fight gravity all that much. But this chamber here, the left ventricle, has to pump blood up, all the way up, through the neck, up to the head, all the way down to your toe, and all the way back up to this chamber, up through the superior and inferior vena cavas, and back to this chamber. That's why the walls, the myocardium of this ventricle is so much thicker than this wall here, because it has to pump blood. It doesn't pump blood to the lungs, but it pumps blood all the way up to the head, to the toes, and back up. It's that one thing. Of course, you have valves, and you have your walk, you exercise, and you have valves in your venous system that assist as well. But this is the main driver. So that completes the cardiac cycle, and so we talked about the percentages of blood, the 75%, and we talked about what causes the 75% to move, and what causes the 25% to move, and we talked about the order in which the atria are relaxed and contract, and the ventricles relaxed and contract, and we also talked about when our four valves shut and close. So that is all for this part one. Study up a little bit, process it, let this absorb, write down notes, see if you can go through the same thing just as I just did in this video. See if you can go through the heart and follow a single red blood cell and be able to write down step by step the order in which it passes through all the chambers and the valves and all the vessels, and writing down all the vessels down correctly, including superior and inferior vena cava, pulmonary trunk, and left and right pulmonary arteries, and left and right pulmonary veins, and as well as the chambers and the valves as well. And then I want you to be able to work your way through how blood actually moves, as far as when talking about low pressure and high pressure, and ventricular contraction and atrial contraction, ventricular relaxation, atrial relaxation, ventricular systole and diastole, and atrial systole and diastole as well. All right. Thank you very much, you guys, for your patience. Study well, and we'll see you in part 2.